Welcome to Agility. I'm your host, John Coleman. Welcome, Denise Pereira Carvalho, to the Agility podcast. How are you doing today?
Thank you. I appreciate being here. I'm great. How about you, John?
Really, really good. Enjoying the temporary sunshine in England. So that's kind of nice.
Is it? Is it cool?
Yeah, it's lovely.
Pleasant.
For us, it's pleasant. Yeah, very nice. So, Denise, would you mind introducing yourself to the audience and maybe also explain how you got to be doing what you're doing today?
So first of all, thank you for the invitation, John, to be talking with your audience. It's a pleasure. So hello, everyone. My name is Denise Pereira Carvalho. So I say with a little bit of accent. I'm Brazilian. I'm based in São Paulo. A little bit of this history. So I have been in corporations for the last 25 years. Doing different things in this journey. I'm a business by graduation. I have done a mix of jobs along this way. This last 7 years, I have been dedicating myself to innovation. I used to be with the DuPont company for the last 16 years, 6 of which leading the innovation center in Brazil, also with global role and studying design thinking and deploying innovation mindsets. So the journey so far is towards innovation from a perspective, in my perspective, of human development. So I have been dedicating myself to studying not only innovation as a result, but how we get there. So that's a big part of my passion. I usually say what is happening from the skin inwards is very important to reach innovation. And we're going to talk a lot about that, John, today, I guess. And I think we have plenty of tools and talks and contents about what is out there. But I think a big part of this behavior side of the story, that's why I call innovation for human development, is a big part of my interest. I left DuPont last year and opened my own company, which is called Ampliarium. So a place, which means from the Latin, a place to amplify. So part of my belief that it always starts in our minds. So if we get an amplified mind, good chances that we fit more great things in it.
So, Denise, a lot of people get excited about entrepreneurs, people who innovate, who generate lots of income, who help to grow economies and so on. But I've noticed in this episode today that you're interested is in developing intrapreneurs. My understanding is kind of like entrepreneurs, except they're inside the walls of the organization. Can you tell us a little bit more about what you mean by an intrapreneur and why you think it's so important?
We just speak a lot about entrepreneurs, right? Being out there and innovating. And based on my experience within a corporation, I started to think a lot and finding ways to deal with what happens in the real world within an organization, especially the big ones. I really enjoy relating to what's real, right? What's on people's minds. And to be within an organization, everybody wants to innovate and everybody's pressed somehow to innovate. And I think we lack content and reflection on what is it like really to be an innovator within an organization, because you have, first of all, to go against culture, right? There are lots of abilities and skills and challenges that happens to an intrapreneur that might not happen to an entrepreneur, right? So, and I think we need to devote more time for that, because otherwise it seems like it's all fun. And we hear a lot, well, you have to have the startup mindset, but the startup does not have the challenges of a big corporation. And as soon as the startup starts growing, they're going to start having the challenges that a big corporation has. So I realized when I got open my business and thought, well, I'm ready to go and sell what I like the most, which is innovating with customers and not only for them. So I created a company to help my customers to innovate with their customers. not for them, but with them. And we can talk about that, about some ecosystem mentality, a systemic mentality behind that. But what I realize is that companies are, especially the mid-sized companies, they don't believe their teams are ready. And maybe because these skills of navigating within the corporation to bring something new. And of course, they're going to face resistance. They're going to face that's the behavior side that I like. And I think we need to explore that further, right? So for instance, you bring a new idea, a new tool, a new way of doing things. And of course, we're all humans. We are going to resist. So an entrepreneur needs first to deal with this resistance. And to deal with that, they have to first deal with themselves, right? To first, do not give up, right? If you have a good idea, keep repeating yourself, keep finding new ways. Empathy is a big part of the story. So people don't need to agree with you. And that's fine if they don't, right? And try to see from their perspective why they're being resistant. So those kind of examples, why I feel that entrepreneurship requires a set of skills that I personally don't see we talk much about it. So that's my point of how we develop and how we bring this strength within the organization. And not only that, John, but and also one aspect that is very, very important is to see everybody as potential intrapreneurs. That's another side of the story, because we tend to think that innovation, entrepreneurship, or the intrapreneurship is for those guys, that are creative guys, or for sales and marketing. And another aspect of this development is to really, I'm not saying this because it's nice, it's because I really believe it, seeing everybody as creative potential, right? Creative, we are all wired to create. Those set of tools can be applied to everyone, and how much more we can explore much more than what we do without those set of skills.
Yeah, I can relate to what you're saying there, Denise. And I think a lot of companies kind of cheat their way out of this. So rather than depending on intrapreneurs, they just buy companies on the outside who are innovating, but that can lead to a situation where they're essentially following. They're not actually disrupting themselves. They're actually quite open to being disrupted themselves. And so, yeah, is that something that you see a lot as well, Denise, where the emphasis is on just try to grow as much as we can with whatever products we have. And if we see something cool going on, we'll just buy them.
Yeah, I see that. And I also see, even when the company creates something, there is a tendency to create something on the side. Like we have this branch, or we have this kind of a startup that is not in the main office, or it's not in the mainstream of the company, exactly to avoid this disruption, because it is complex, John. I'm not saying it's easy, by the way. It is complex. We are complex. And we bring this complexity, and that's another set of skills, how we navigate complexity. And not only complication, because there is this difference between complexity and complication. I mean, the complexity of having different stakeholders who think completely different and take advantage of that difference and see what emerges, right? So yeah, to your point, yes, I see this either buying someone from outside, or even if the creation is from within, separating that somehow.
Yeah, I can relate to that, Denise. There's a fairly famous complexity model known as the Cynefin sense-making framework, and in there they have the clear domain where you just follow a recipe and do something. And then you've got a complicated domain where you might need more time to investigate, or you need to bring some experts to help you. So it's like an area for self-managing teams. And the complex space is where you actually need a little bit of fresh thinking, because the experts themselves they could go into analysis paralysis and could be limited actually in their thinking. And in the case of chaos, you might just need to do something to react to what's going on in the market. Or there's the fifth domain, which a lot of people ignore, aporia, where essentially is a combination of disorder, confusion, if you like. We need to reflect to decide where to go next. So innovation really is in the space of complexity and complex domain in particular, and the what I call the positive chaos domain, where we relax some constraints, we let go of the shackles, we give people maybe a time constraint or right to work within, but as such, they're free to come up with what they want to come up with. And that's probably what we're going to get onto next. How do we create that support in an organization? How do we develop these entrepreneurs in the organization?
And I think this is one point that is important, John. Something that we can and should borrow from the startup mindset to corporations is how we deal with chaos and how we deal with failure. And we need to talk about command and control because people respond a lot to fear, right? So people are moved, in my opinion, that's my personal opinion, by power and fear, right? And I think we need to add to that equation purpose, right? So what wakes you up in the morning? I also always make these jokes about, you keep thinking who's going to be in the meeting and who should I invite to that project meeting? And I usually say, yes, invite the opposer, invite the resistant people. They can add something and something that you didn't think about. So I think the structure, there's a lot to touch when you're talking about innovation and what to do in organizations and how a startup reacts versus a very established company. And to react differently, we need to see command and control and fear and power from a different perspective.
I go along with what you're saying about the invitations. What I see sometimes, people who, my peers, they react in a kind of a sensitive way to people saying no to them, and they see it as a bad thing. I actually see that as a gift. Someone chose to be open with me about their reservations about the next steps, and when people are saying no, I can do something. Like we okay, so this is what you have a problem with. So maybe you're right. Maybe there's other options. I don't know. That's much better than lip service, where people say they're going to do something and they don't. It's that's a really tricky situation. We're going to come back to purpose later on. I just wanted to talk about the main topic of today, which is developing intrapreneurs. One of the things that I notice, particularly in large organizations, they've got basic plumbing problems with their delivery. They're really struggling to get stuff out the door, or they're getting stuff out the door, but they don't know what's working. It's taken forever. It's taken a year, 2 years, 3 years. They're getting something out. They hand it off to somebody else. They don't know whether they've actually deployed it or not. They've never actually checked. Did it make a difference? So the projects that they do this year are the same as the projects they did last year. Different theme because it's a different year and all that kind of stuff, but essentially the same stuff. And assuming that that's what's contributing to increased sales, given that maybe we need some kind of outcome oriented thinking where you're really worried about the customer, what the customer thinks, what the end user thinks, and how they're interacting with the product. How do you help to develop entrepreneurs in an organization where they're still focused on outputs? Denise, what are your thoughts on that?
My mantra, John, is to innovate with instead of innovating for, right? And I agree with you. I have this clear perception that first, we are too much among ourselves. So I see a lot that in corporations. So we have meetings with our peers, our colleagues who are under the same structure, with the same leadership, same values, same products, same customers. So we are in this bias of doing the same thing, right? So I think we develop the entrepreneurship by actually doing things with customers is a great exercise. And you have to accept in the beginning an amount of risk, right? So people are afraid of doing this, of asking customers, other players in your supply chain to interact with you and to understand and see different perspectives. And to do that, you need to be open, right? And I think when you innovate with, your customer has a louder voice or should have, right? So I think you break this vicious cycle when you actually first open up to listen to not only customers, mainly customers, but everybody that can contribute. Could be your distributor, could be your logistics, could be whoever is in this chain that could help understand what's happening. So when you have those voices, especially the customer's voice, that should play loud, right? That should be heard. And I think it creates a natural cycle of transformation within the organization because first you open up to receive them and to listen to them, actively listening to them. And that part is so hard, John. I must make an emphasis here because I've done tons of those sessions with customers. I was lucky enough to receive 10,000 people in 7 years in the Brazil Innovation Center. And that part, when you're listening to your customer, you're listening. It's so common for us to listen as long as you buy what I'm selling. I'm going to listen to you, but as long as you buy what I'm selling. And I used to say to folks, guys, you're going to receive this customer. And I ask you a kind favor, forget about your product. Imagine how they would look at me, John, like saying, you're really crazy, right? So here I am dying to sell my stuff, dying to make my numbers, because that's another aspect. People behave the way they are measured. So they are dying to sell, they are dying to do the numbers, and you are asking me to forget about my product. Because when you're actively listening, you might listen that what you're doing is not fulfilling.
I can completely relate to that. There's a guy called Clayton Christensen. He died. He was famous with customer jobs to be done.
To be done, yeah.
And great examples are like Airbnb and Uber, where previous companies like Halo, for example, had a hailing app where you could hail a taxi, but the model was different. I could hail a London black cab if I was in London, for example, and I'd still have the same problems I had before. If I lose my phone, I don't have the ID of the driver. And what often happens, you're spot on there, because what often happens is when you bring an idea to a product group, we talk about going from projects to products, but product isn't the be all and end all either, because when you bring the idea to the product group, if it doesn't fit the agenda of the product group, they just bounce it. And so I think it's really crucial what you're saying here is like unlocking that thinking, getting away from the net promoter scores, getting away from those KPIs. If putting on headsets and listening to customer calls, listen to customers calling in, but in your case, actually maybe seeing customers, end user interacting with the product, and maybe they don't like what they see. As Steve Blank said, no business plan survives the first interaction with the customer. So if this isn't the right thing, what is? You're trying to develop a kind of a heat-seeking missile, really, aren't you, to try and find where the value is, where are these ideas. So how have people reacted to that, Denise, when you've said to them, leave the product agenda behind? How many people, like if you 10 people out of 10, how many of them are able to do that actually and kind of let go and actually embrace the approach that you're talking about?
In the beginning, they tend to be skeptical, and I can read their thoughts. They look at me like with their mind, like, you are really crazy. I need to do these numbers. Why are you telling me this? But as they go with the flow, especially with the design process, which I'm a big fan of, they start to understand what is building with the customer. And that's part of preparing the entrepreneurs, John, because I make this joke because actually it's created by a famous guy here in Brazil. His name is Claudio Tebas. He's a brilliant guy. He's all on creativity, and he created this empathy monsters. And I put that in the presentation of developing entrepreneurs. So the empathy monsters are the ones that really step in front of you and your customer, because you start already blocking yourself, right? As soon as you listen something that you don't agree, here it comes the empathy monster. When, for example, you're telling me something, so you're telling me one of the monsters that I like the most is my worst is best. For example, you tell me, Denise, someone hit my car yesterday. And instead of listening to you, what do? I jump over the conversation and say, oh, John, you cannot believe it. What happened to me last year? As soon as I do that, I stop listening to you because you were telling me someone hit your car. So instead of actively listening to you, what do? I compete with you. I bring something that happened to me that is even worse than what happened to you. So we are that basic. This is called the monster, my worst is best. So
I like that.
So that's just a joke to say, we have these empathy monsters all over. And then I present that in the beginning and say, guys, you're going to see those empathy monsters all around. So you need to be with yourself and resist them. So another story of the monster. So we were developing a new kind of yogurt. So we took the team to the supermarket. So that's another story with the B2B companies. They don't think they need to go to the field and talk to users. And I even heard from people, John, saying to me, from the B2B perspective, I don't sell to end users. And I said, well, are you sure you don't sell to end users? What do you do after all? So we have this mindset that if I don't sell to end users, I don't have to talk to them. So at the time, the end user was not our primary customer, but I asked the team to go to the supermarket and talk to final users, the ones who were buying yogurt. And they look at you again like saying, oh my God, why do I have to leave the office? So all of those actions start changing the culture. Because people first, you leave your habitual thinking, you leave your habitual routine, you go to the field, you talk to real people, not people, not fake environment, real people. And so we were a team, and part of the team were very technical guys, very knowledgeable. So we approached one woman buying yogurt for the family. And one of the questions we were first observing to see how they would react, if they would read the labels, what were driving the buying process. And at one point, one technical guy asked her, so why are you buying? She was into sports and she said, I'm buying because it's super good protein base. And I remember this guy like going crazy. And he grabbed me and said, it's not protein. Protein is not the main thing there. And I said to him, look, just hold your monster, right? So this is an empathy monster. That's fine. We know that it's not full of protein, but you need to listen to your user. That's her perspective. And we need to understand what's on people's minds. So this technical monster is again all over because you understand so much about it and yogurt, that particular yogurt was not based on protein, but that's not that was not the user's perspective. That's the struggle of holding people. You have to hold yourself. That's part of what I call preparing entrepreneurs, John. You have to really hold back and bear with yourself, bear with your being uncomfortable, and listen to whatever is being said, even if you highly disagree.
Yeah, I know what you mean. And there's another thing as well, going back to the Cynefin sense-making framework as well, something that Dave Snowden talks about in the complex space is often when you're in the complex space, you might exact, and what he meant by that was you might use a product for a purpose that it was not intended for. You might actually repurpose it for a different use. So that was kind of interesting. I'm not sure if that example of the yogurt really ties into it because there wasn't any protein in the product, or not that much at least. But the perception of the customer was that was a healthy product from that point of view, I guess. And so maybe the customer, the end user in this case, was consuming it for different reasons than you actually thought. Kind of like in the milkshake video with Clayton Christensen as well, wasn't it? What job did you think the milkshake is doing? Yeah.
Yeah. But that perception of the user could lead to a different product. You know what I mean? That's why empathy in design is so important. Even though for that particular product was not true and was not what the team was looking for, that can open up for a new project, a new possibility to drive a yogurt to protein. We were not thinking about that. And that was funny, just a funny story, John.
Yeah.
A couple of ladies that we interviewed was funny. The team was laughing a lot after that because they were buying the yogurt, the good yogurt for the kids, the healthy yogurt for them because they were going to the gym, and they were buying those very cheap ones. And when we asked them, why are you buying these cheap ones? And a couple of them said to my husband, and we said, oh, poor husbands, right? Because the ladies are there making sure the family is have the best yogurts, and those cheap ones, the liter ones, like the economic package for the husbands. And we were laughing. It's just a curiosity. But anyway, that also opened up a laugh in the team. And we said, well, maybe we have the husband's yogurt, right? So those kind of fun insights can come up. But back to your previous questions, those kind of interactions, they really touch the human perspective. That changes the office environment. It does change the environment. But you need to be open for that, because if you don't do anything, you're not going to change anything.
So we need to get out of the building. Another little constraint that I've noticed, not in large organizations, it's not even just about we're focusing on outputs right now and excuses like we don't have access to the customer, lack of real sincere appetite to really try to meet a customer, meet an end user for the good of the organization, to figure out are we doing the right thing. But what I also see is conflict and priorities in some organizations. And particularly when people are talking about being agile and so on, often the reason that they're being agile isn't what it says on the tin. Often it's not about innovation. It's not about disruption. It's about squeezing more juice out of the teams. It's about saving money, right? Which is not the right reason, by the way, for doing that. Because agile is actually supposed to be for being more adaptive. The product management guys are way ahead on this as well, about, really trying to find where that value is. So when you're dealing with people in front of you who are, first of all, they're dealing with their empathy monsters and they've got their KPIs, but can you imagine the KPIs in an organization where the focus is on cost and efficiency and getting the space to even think about innovation, the space to have a safe to fail experiment, and for it to be safe to fail, no one should die, it shouldn't cost us too much, we don't go bust, and I guess people don't get fired as a result because it's like career damaging and so on. So having the safety to fail when we think we're predictable about delivering value, and we think we're milking a cow, actually, when actually really what we're doing a lot of the time is we're trying to find the cow we don't have yet, the one we don't know about yet. And just getting that space. I mean, how have you dealt with that situation where you've got these maybe conflicting priorities in an organization, maybe excessively focused on efficiency to the point that it's actually damaging innovation?
I'm bossy when that happens, John. I tell you a story. One time, a marketing manager came to me and said, "Oh, I love this design thinking and all things you're saying, and I want to ask you, how can you guarantee that I'm going to sell more with the design thinking workshop?" And I said, "I cannot at all. Don't misunderstand me. I cannot guarantee you're going to sell more. Just that's the beginning point. You need to do this kind of workshop. Don't call it design thinking. It's something else. That's fine. That's fine too, right? You cannot do gym and call it yoga, right? So that's fine with doing CrossFit and all this stuff, but don't call it yoga. It's a different story." And she looked at me like, "Oh." And because I think we need to, that's another point of being resilient as an entrepreneur, John, and say, what are you really looking at? Are you really looking at innovating and listening to your customer, or you're just looking at selling more? And by the way, customers are very sensitive when you're asking them for an innovation session and you just want to put lots of PowerPoint presentations selling your product. And I cannot tell you how many times I cut slides. People would say, I will start with this presentation. It's an hour presentation about my product. And I would go, no. Simply no way. And I asked them, how would you like your customer to feel about you? So they're going to come for innovation session, and then you start that day with an hour presentation of your product. You naturally don't want to listen to them. We need to start with this open space. And to do that, you need to deal with your anxiety of selling, 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 selling. And that's why when I make the point of forget your product for a second, right? Forget your product for half a day and listen to the customer. So I think we need to make a decision, John. Are you going to do a CrossFit marathon or are you going to do yoga? What's your point? So, and either is good, but we cannot call it that you're going for innovation and disruption if you're just doing a campaign to sell exactly this product as it is. It's very tough to do within an organization.
Thank you. Yeah, it is indeed. And I can relate to a lot of what you're saying, and getting some lovely nuggets out of your talk here today. Thank you for that. I'm going to remember the empathy monsters in particular. Really loving that. I wanted to get back to purpose, because another challenge that I see as well in organizations is they have this purpose. Well, it's called a purpose. They might call it a vision. They might call it a mission. They're going to do this. It's usually, I'm going to be the best blah, blah company in the blah, blah industry by blah, blah year. It's usually what I see, right? And it's not very clear. I don't know what that means. It's often very far away, 10 years away. So I think some UK politician said a few years ago, there was something, it was before the Paris Climate Accord, there was some other climate accord, and the UK signed up for something that was way above what they could really achieve. And he was asked afterwards, why did you commit to that? And he said it was always impossible, so nobody could give out to me. It was always impossible. So there's nothing wrong with kind of having an almost impossible perfection vision that you're striving for, but having some purpose that really is meaningful is important. What techniques do you recommend, Denise, when you see that the organization actually doesn't have a purpose? They're just going for the numbers. They're doing one quarter after the next. They've kind of lost their way. They do have some blah, blah purpose, but it's not really something that's inspiring to that light people up. Any tips or tricks for execs out there and what to do when the purpose might be like that?
That's a really tough question, John, because I think it's so much our based on values, right? So what you value the most, and it's hard to say to give a tip if you don't value. So I give you an example when I was creating my website and the company, the Ampliarium company, and I put a subtitle as innovation for human development. And I asked many people that I trust to give me feedbacks on the website and so on. And some said, that's not too business oriented and, might sound a little bit not numbers, not results, and not this or that. And I go, well, that's my purpose. That's innovation for human development. And I know I might maybe miss some work or people that are really dying for results and people don't care about people orientation. And that's cool. I don't believe we do genuine innovation if you don't see the human aspect. That's a really personal opinion. So that's my purpose. And it's really what it holds. What holds this is a very deep belief. So I find it hard. What my suggestion would be for those companies that really, if they are willing to have a purpose, they're really true. And I think especially after COVID, we so much need that truth, John. And maybe you can call me romantic or whatever, but I really believe that we need it. And we need also back to the beginning when we started saying that the belief that everybody's creative. I think the point that we reached right now as a humanity, we really need everybody to be innovators. We really need everybody to be entrepreneurs, to be designers, to be rethinking the future we want to live in, right? So if you're not based on purpose for that, I doubt whatever project you have on mind is going to be lasting too long because people are changing so quickly.
Thank you. I can really relate to that. I was talking to Tobias Mayer a few episodes back as well about authenticity, and Robert Annis as well, an earlier episode about authentic agility, being honest, being open, being sincere, I think is going to be crucial going forward. I wanted to ask you about creativity. You might have heard of a guy called Sir Ken Robinson. He's famous for a TED talk about the arts, and that in education, it's almost like we beat the arts out of ourselves, and we kind of our body is there to carry our head around. And in a lot of academic systems, we've driven the creativity out of the people. And do you have any suggestions in terms of how do we tap into? Because I think your philosophy is that we're all naturally creative, but how do we kind of tap back into that? Because people often kind of get conditioned a little bit. How do you kind of release that, unleash that creativity that is naturally there within all of us?
That's a good question. If we think about our life, right? So when we start, there's another book that called Lifelong Kindergarten, and I like this perspective of having this kindergarten within us all lifelong. And if we think about that, when we start our journey, it's all colorful. What is a kindergarten like? It's colorful. You have all those colored pens, and all over you can do whatever you want, right? So we're kind of invited to do that. As we grow up, I usually say our life starts to be gray and gray, right? So from this colorful to an office that creativity is not part of the scenario, right? So I think the environment and a place to innovate. I know we are very virtual at the moment and we have tools for that, but the invitation with a place and those offices that we see a lot, there's very creative oriented, and some people are critical about it when they say it's not only about the space. I agree. It's not only about the place, but it's also about the place. So when you have a little corner or a room or whatever you have, that it's kind of a reminder to be creative, I think that helps. That also helps, and for us to forget a little bit, we are super task oriented. We are task oriented. We're not creativity oriented. So that's part of the mindset together with a reminder with the environment in the office. So what could the organization do to invite people in, to say, okay, everybody's creative? I think that helps. That's not the whole story, but it's helpful.
And I think even just giving people a bit of space, a little bit of slack, so they've actually got time to think,
Excellent.
would be a great start, wouldn't it?
Yes. Agree. And also invite people into give opinion. That's something that I usually do that because I want to get people's perspective. And but just by doing it, I realized how it impacts people. So you have a team. And I remember at the Innovation Center, we were a team, very short team, like 2 of us. And there was this lady cleaning the space. She was just cleaning, right? So we were choosing a paint, another color for the office. And I invited them in and said, what do you think? What do you think it's beautiful? What's your opinion? What do you think it looks better? And I cannot tell you her face. She was so surprised. She's, how come you invited me to ask my opinion? Because when you ask people's opinion, you're saying your contribution valid, right? So yes, you are creative. You're giving a signal that they are part of it. Could be you see, it's small thing, but you are considering, you're putting them within the space.
Denise, thank you so much for coming on the show to talk about developing intrapeneurs. I really found it very enjoyable. Lots of common ground with John Seddon as well. He talks about the treasure being inside the building in terms of finding value, and you've come at it from a different angle, and I really appreciate that you've done that. So thank you so much, and looking forward to hearing lots more of your work in the future.
Thank you, John. Pleasure talking to you.
Thank you.
If you would like your voice message to be featured on a future podcast episode, please leave a voice message at anchor.fm/xagility/message. That's anchor.fm/xagility/message. Thank you.